Every time that I have to type out the acronym for Only Murders in the Building, some part of my brain that can't read sees it as Orange is the New Black. Like, because the acronyms just like objectively look so similar, which is to say that apparently, despite everybody's best efforts, I seem to have learned like whatever the sight word reading method is more than phonics. Um, don't be like me. Learn some phonemic decoding. And we are live here to chat about what we watched this week, which was for me quite a lot, if I'm being honest. I marathoned the entirety of Squid Game. I watched the finale of What If. I caught up on Supergirl. I caught up on Stargirl. I watched Orange is the New Black. I almost said it again. Maybe it's because I'm like wearing orange fall. We kind of match ish, like my general
Yeah, we're
makeup
both
and your
wearing
sweater.
orange.
I don't know what it is, but I keep wanting to say Orange is the New Black. Only Murders in the Building. I watched quite a bit this week. I watched a 3-hour finale of Bachelor in Paradise. I caught up on Married at First Sight. It's just tragic. It's appalling. But before we get into that, Kate, how are you, other than hearing that I watched 3 hours of Bachelor in Paradise? And what news do we have for this week?
I'm great, and I totally see what you did there. uh, so, for as much of a big deal we've made about the past 2 weeks about forgetting the news, I only have one thing for news, and it was because I forgot about it last week. So it's Netflix has a movie coming out in January called Operation Mincemeat, and it's about the actual operation in World War II. But the reason we mention it is it has, Colin Firth, Matthew McFadden, Penelope Wilton, Johnny Flynn, so all of the good Jane Austen actors. Just throwing it out there. It's going to be pretty much every single actor is in Jane Austen somewhere somehow, and I'm excited for it just simply for that.
I looked it over when you sent like a link or whatever about it. It looks fantastic. I'm very excited. That was news worth waiting for. Other news that you might have mentioned, I think you did mention this last week was, the release of Made on Netflix, which I glanced at the trailer, but I need to be in the mood to like be sad to watch it, but I've been seeing rave reviews on
Yes,
that.
yes, you're. I have to wait for the weekend because I'm going to be sad. I
Right.
felt that on a deep level. I understand, and that's why I have not watched more than just the first few minutes of it.
Thank you so much for understanding. And I questioned because I actually watched the trailer for Made and Squid Game back to back, and I questioned, are both of these going to make me sad? Not in the same way. And we'll get into that when we talk about Squid Game, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Which I enjoyed. Let's take away the thoroughly. I enjoyed, and we're going to get into that. But first, with the news wrapped up, and Carrie's here. He says, "Good evening, ladies. Good evening, Carrie. Would anybody be opposed to diving straight into the What If finale? All spoilers included, if you can't tell by the thumbnail. I want to hear what you have to say about everything but Peggy Carter specifically,
Everything but Peggy.
including. Did I say everything but?
You said everything but, or at least that's what I heard.
Listen, language is so hard.
Um, I mean, but without Peggy, my only thing is like, yay, we saw it coming. It was kind of what we anticipated. It was fun, but that's kind of what we thought was going to happen. Woo.
Right.
Uh, um, but when it comes to Peggy, it was nice to see her. Like, I would say that for the most part, most of the characters got equal screen time that were pulled back. But there
Mm-hmm.
was something about how they framed it that they still made her kind of the de facto leader, other than the fact that the Watcher and Doctor Strange was kind of like recruited them, which is always nice. It was nice to see that they allowed her to fill the role that Steve normally fills of being like the de facto leader. And it was nice to see that she did it just as well, if not better, which is always it was just fun to see that. It's also a relationship I never knew I wanted, but now I love that it's one of my favorite friendships in all of the MCU is Black Widow and Peggy Carter. It's
Yes.
because it has the same like her making fun of her being from past times, but it has more of a female friendship where they are messing around camaraderie style, and it has less undertones of is it supposed to be romantic? It's very much like it's a friendship that is female friendships are sorely lacking in the MCU, and it was
Oh my
nice to
goodness,
finally see
yes.
one that was really well done.
It was really well done. It was a unique dynamic. I really enjoyed seeing Peggy be a part of the action, and it really helped it come full circle since she was such an integral part of the first episode. Carrie says he did see, so spoil away, and he adds the only thing that he didn't like was that we didn't get Gamora or a Gamora episode before this finale. Her entrance was very interesting in this finale, and we get an interesting friendship for her as well. What did you think of Gamora in this?
So I'm not 100% sure, but I think that that was the episode that was removed. So I was under the
Oh,
impression that it was supposed to be like the finale was removed. But what it actually seems like is they took what was supposed to be episode 9 and removed that, and they're going to put it in the next season. So I'm sure that
uh,
that episode will answer a couple like remaining details, and that's why they took it out, is so that they'll have like enough to pull over into the next season.
because to an extent, and I was reading an interview with like the producer or whatever, and the interviewer asks him, what led you to kind of go down this route where it's kind of a cliffhanger? And he was sort of and I was kind of taken aback by the question because I didn't really get the sense that it didn't really feel like a cliffhanger to me. And he says the same thing, that it's not really a cliffhanger. There is, to some extent, each story sort of wrapped up. It's just we don't necessarily know where it goes from there. And there's a lot of questions left unanswered. So, do you consider this a cliffhanger? And if not, what are the questions left unanswered that are kind of making it seem almost cliffhangery?
It, to me, it's actually very wrapped up. I would actually almost argue it's the opposite of a cliffhanger. It's just that because it was so many different multiverse and we only got a taste of each of their stories, there's still so much to they could play around with each of those timelines, and to see like we basically go back to where they came back and see how that all falls out. But in a weird way, the one that got the most resolution still was framed like the cliffhanger. So when Peggy goes back to the events where she's on the ship, and instead they actually pull out Steve's body out of the Hydra Smasher, um, that was kind of both a cliffhanger and a resolution. And that's still to me the closest we got to a cliffhanger. There's definitely more story they can tell with the Watcher and Doctor Strange and what they were doing with this, but in the context of the story with them fighting Ultron, the only thing that really is hanging to me is could they possibly bring it back and say something about how like whatever the guy the virus guy, what if he takes control of the body and then he makes it evil again, like he revives the problem and just does something else with it. That's the only thing I could say is a cliffhanger from the information we're given.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was supposed to come out in a different order and we were supposed to have Gamora's episode and that raises more questions,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's like people that have seen that feel like there's more unanswered questions than what we have.
I think there's some unanswered questions on the like where do we go from here front. We see where people end up, but we don't see where they go, or in some cases what happens in certain universes next. We just know where they were sort of dropped and pushed off to, and we don't have, other than, you know, post-credit scene, we don't really have much exploration before beyond that. And that's what Carrie's saying here in the chat. He is asking, he wonders if that was actually supposed to be asking about the post-credit scene where we get the revelation about modern air quotes Steve. What did you think of that? And will you sign my petition for Peggy Carter to be the sole lead of season 2?
I mean, I think we're just like co-writers on that petition.
That's right.
Honestly. But I mean, it's one of the few like happy endings that we get in the MCU, so that was really nice to see. It's also, for as much as that, like, when I see people really criticize or point fingers at Steve going back in time, yes, technically he did do that in canon, and it's not great. It was a selfish choice. It is on some levels has the possibility of repercussions like a Barry Allen choice, but thankfully we don't see that really. You just see that he's not there anymore. But I can accept that they made that choice simply because it was a little bit of fan service. We got to have Haley Atwell back in that movie, and it was a reason to let Chris Evans leave the movies. So I don't really always blame him, but it was a nice way of writing that reunion back into this version of the story without having to do it the same way. So it was very clear that she wanted to go back to be with Steve, but instead of making it like her abandon the modern world that needs her, it brought Steve to her.
Yeah.
Which was nice.
And it also was just, you know, it was nice that she didn't have to make that sacrifice, because it is sort of a, you know, it's a sacrifice to change times and to change, you know, what you were around and who you were around, you know, of those who are left. Well, where do we go from here? I'm kind of joking about the Peggy Carter being the sole lead of season 2, but we've touched on the fact that there are still some unanswered questions, even though I found the resolution for everybody to be pretty pleasant because I knew there was going to be a season 2. Where do you want them to take season 2?
I honestly don't really know, because the storyline that I most care about got the most resolution in that ending. I don't really see us getting much, as much as I would be here for it. I don't see us getting much more Peggy Carter unless it's just purely for her like action, rather than an exploration of her happiness. They probably will do a lot with the T'Challa. Well, I don't know if they will. They might try to do some more with the T'Challa and Star-Lord storyline, especially since they cannot do that in the MCU anymore, like in the actual movies. So I think they might try to explore it as much as they can in the cartoon.
Yeah. Carrie in the chat says, would it be crazy if Steve turns out to be a Winter Soldier? I don't think that'd be crazy, because that was almost the premise of most of the first episodes of this season, is what if so-and-so was this thing that they otherwise weren't? And for Steve, considering, you know, his friendship with Bucky, and, you know, that's what Bucky was and so on, it seems like a reasonable situation to explore. And here's what's great about that. I have been advocating this entire time, not for plot, never plot, but instead for there to be an explored romance within this world, franchise, animated endeavor that for whatever reason they won't do in live action because they're scaredy cats. If they were to explore something with Steve and him being Winter Soldier and something like that instead, but it sets them up to do like a Steve Bucky ship, which I believe is one of the most popular ones within Marvel. But if anybody knows and cares about Marvel more deeply than me, please fact check me. Any romance that has otherwise not been explored and would be interesting to explore, I'm here for, and they need to do in season 2. And I know they're trying to kind of keep it still in some weird way, like canon compliant, and not like, you know, touch Kevin Feige's precious children, but I don't care. So,
I mean, it'd be fun to see, but I don't think they'll do that.
but Kate, I asked nicely.
I know you asked nicely, but we can only get one star. We can only get one little treat, and they've already given us Peggy.
You're right.
And if they bring him in as the Winter Soldier, I can already see the entire storyline. If they bring him in as the Winter Soldier, then it's an even more like they were kind of in love, I guess the best way to put it. And him coming back as the Winter Soldier would be almost even more heartbreaking than Bucky, his best friend, coming back as the Winter Soldier in the original. So, and I will also say, I think Peggy's episode followed the most closely to the original story that was in the movies.
True.
They really only changed the character of who it was. Mm-hmm. And then as we've gone along, the more farther and farther it gets from the actual movie. So they might go back to doing that. Like anything that has to do with Peggy, they're going to mirror it as closely as possible to it being like Steve. So if they bring him back as the Winter Soldier, they're going to basically just do the same thing as the movie, just different characters.
I know that you're right. I refuse to accept it. I'm in this with an agenda. And if there's one thing I can do is stick it out with my agenda until I end up right by sheer absence of other options. I'm going to give us a quick little complaining break because I don't have a lot to say about Supergirl, but there's one little thing I wanted to complain about with Supergirl. So I'm sandwiching it in between two things that I'm raving about. What If was fantastic, loved it. I'll complain about the lack of rom-com, but it was great. Only Murders in the Building, which is what we're going to talk about next, which is apparently not Orange is the New Black, is also fantastic. And Supergirl has been good, but I feel in this latest episode like I was going crazy because something was really bothering me that I feel like they didn't mean for it to be annoying. And I'll tell you what it was. So you've got Supergirl and her team and her friends and whatever, and they're trying to like save the city, save the world, like love that, whatever. But they're struggling with PR. They're struggling with press. They need the city to know what they're doing and not see them as a mystery entity. So lo and behold, here comes journalists, right? Supergirl, Kara, is a journalist, so she has already been writing stories about Supergirl and friends, as have her coworkers. But they're a part of this like journalist company that's like, we need more clicks and we need to be the top of whatever. So we need to get more Supergirl stories. So there's this like supposed to be this mean, aggressive lady editor who's like forcing them to get stories about Supergirl, right? So her friend William, a guy, a boy, a man, if you will, who works there, she basically, Supergirl, as Supergirl, not as Kara, like works with him to like start feeding him information and get them better PR and blah, blah, blah. So in this latest episode, he's caught in the middle. A term I use loosely, air quotes, if you will, because he's not caught in the middle of anything. It's not a difficult situation, to be honest. He's allowed to like go inside the Supergirl, lair and meet all the Supergirl team members, like within their identities, blah, 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 and write about this. But they simply ask that, like, to keep the city safe, there are some things that, like, you can't write about. Like, you can't, like, reveal our identities, blah, 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 right? Like, they have some very, very, very basic ground rules. His editor, on the other hand, was like, no, like, we need a source, we need a source for this. We need information for this. We need to sensationalize this. Like, she's supposed to be like this mean, abrasive, vaguely unethical person. And he's caught in the middle. And eventually, how it ends in the episode, and I'm quite convinced that they intend for this to be like this good shining moment for him. He's like, I'm not going to follow anybody's rules. I'm going to write what I think is best, and I won't be pressured by like the Supergirl and Friends team to like, withhold things a certain way or like run articles by them first. And I'm not going to listen to my editor. I'm your source for Supergirl stuff, so you can't tell me anything. I'm not listening to you. And basically there's this like scene where he puts his editor in her place. And the entire thing is like wildly uncomfortable to me, because this is supposed to be like this girl power show, right? Like feminism, blah, 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 whatever. It's not that I don't need men to exist on this show. They can. And it's not that I don't need men to be powerful on this show. They can. But the fact that the entire, and like, note that this is one of the final episodes of this entire show. Like, we are quite close to the series finale, right? This is supposed to be a notable episode of her story getting out there. The fact that one of the like final shining moments for this character, for this guy who's been a part of the show for a couple seasons now, is him refusing to listen to any difficult women, essentially, both the good difficult woman and the bad difficult woman, because like it's really bad to like be a businesswoman and try to get clicks or whatever. It's just the audacity of this guy, the pleasure that he took in like putting them down. And he's supposed to be like the good person who's like telling Supergirl's story. I was pissed. I did not enjoy watching it. I understand that to some degree he's like in the right if we're gonna like split hairs and like what should be told, whatever. Everybody had a little bit of truth on all sides. It was the way that he did it and the pleasure that he took from like taking the other woman down. Disliked. Get it together before the finale. This has been Salty Corner with Cammie. The end.
The end. I can appreciate that. And that was the entirety of my issue with Supergirl when I was still watching.
Yeah. It's just I don't want to see male characters take pleasure in taking down female characters, which is why I enjoy Only Murders in the Building, because everybody gets to shine and they don't really take each other down. I mean, they'll bicker, they'll whatever, but there isn't some like shining moment where like some guy takes down all women on the entire show or some girl takes down all guys on the entire show, whatever. Anyways, Only Murders in the Building. This was a pretty big revealing episode. This really moved our like mystery plot forward quite a bit. What did you think?
I felt called out. Them opening the show in the perspective of the fans was, I mean, golden, but it felt like they were calling us out just a little bit.
Just a little bit. They were showing like comedically crazy fans, and I have to assume that it's like an intentional caricature. It's not like they're like, nobody involved in this show is like new to the industry to where they truly think like all fans are like that. So I think it was for comedic effect, but it was funny.
No, and it was funny. It was just, it was kind of like the amount of how much of each week we're picking somebody else to kind of do it through their perspective and like take a new the shtick each week. And this week was the caricature of the fans. I just thought that was funny. I also think it's funny that they just were like, we're so desperate. Please help us figure this out. But yeah, this week was definitely revealing. It was revealing in the way that it pushed a lot of things that needed to catch up to where we were contextually. It didn't actually tell us all that much more about Dima's connection with any of the crimes. We pretty much knew most of the things going in. There was kind of a back and forth of already existing back and forth of were they actually responsible for Tim's death or not. I believe last week I said I didn't think they were, but now we know they weren't. But what it
Wait,
did
you think
do
they
was,
absolutely weren't? Because I feel like, didn't they
no,
say, unless I'm like misunderstanding, didn't they say like he was poisoned and then he was shot after he was poisoned? And I could be so misinterpreting this. I was interpreting that to mean like somebody went in and poisoned him at some point earlier in the day, and we saw the, father son duo leaving the building, whatever. And then somebody actually came in and shot him after he was already poisoned, and the person who shot him is still a mystery, but the person who poisoned him, I thought we're supposed to infer it's the sponsors. I forget their name. It starts with a D. Am I wrong?
Demas. I don't think it was quite as explicit as that, but that was what I interpreted as a possibility.
Okay.
I wasn't quite as like, I wasn't sure if that's what they were trying to tell us or if that was just something I was inferring from what they were showing, of like, he didn't seem all that surprised that he was being accused for the Tim Kono thing, which tells me he wasn't completely innocent. But if he wasn't there to pull the trigger, he was not the one that shot Tim Kono. That's the only part that was telling me no. And just like as a structure of storytelling, going into it knowing it was episode 8, I knew that they were not at least going to nail down who exactly
Right.
the entirety of the murder in this episode. So by the time we were even just 10 minutes in and they were only accusing those two, that family, I knew that they could have been connected, but it was not the full picture.
Mm-hmm.
But this episode was great in at least like catching everybody up to that point. Like if you were watching it and you hadn't put all these pieces together, it definitely made sure, hey, we're on the same page now. Whether or not you realize that, hey, maybe they poisoned him or not, up until that, we're all on the same page. We go into the last 2 episodes and we will figure out what actually fully completely happened. And probably at the end, somebody else will be murdered, kicking off season 2.
Right. Well, I mean, that's kind of what we see. What's his name's girlfriend potentially murdered right at the end of this episode.
Yes.
Nancy, is her name Nancy? Am I making that
Jan.
up? Nan?
Completely off. Jan.
It sounds similar vowels, a couple letters in common. Okay, so we see her murdered. So there is at least a second murder in the building. But I feel as if we're now looking for up to three murderers at this point, because we have whoever murdered girlfriend, we have whoever shot Tim Kono, and we have whoever poisoned Tim Kono. And I am presuming we have caught the person who poisoned Tim Kono, and they may get off on a technicality or something like that, since they technically weren't the ones that killed him when all of this is said and done. So that may be like a murderer roam free type of ending. And then we don't know still who shot him or who killed Jan, which might be two different people.
So all of that's true, and I still am on I think Oscar's dad did it.
That may very well be. I don't disagree with that, actually.
Yeah. So from what I remember, the handwriting that was on her note looked very similar to the handwriting we've seen previously with the dog. And some being able to get into her apartment, it's not necessary that they have like actual access, a key or whatever, considering like we've seen Mabel and Charles break into so many apartments. But it would make the most sense that it would be somebody that has access to the apartment. And seeing as Oscar's dad is a maintenance man, he should have keys to all the apartments.
Sorry, I had to find my unmute button there for a second. I agree, and I think it's like when you're talking about the location of this, and the location of this murder is so integral to where it's like the setting of everything. It's where they're filming the podcast. It's in the title of the show. Like the building is almost a character in and of itself. They took a lot of time in early episodes really setting up how important this building was and how much everybody's trying to stay there and how difficult it is to get in there. And we see a lot of aspects like security and maintenance, like all of that become a component of the story. It would make a lot of sense that whoever is the murderer would be somebody who's not just passing through the building. It's not just somebody who, it's not a visitor, I want to say.
Yeah. Well, and the only other person that would make any sense to have killed Jan would be the guy that owned the cat. And after she had just accused him, that's too big of a flashing red sign to point to, hey, he killed her.
I am hopeful that we are going to see this resolved by the end of season 1. And by this, I mean the murder of Tim Kono. Now, any additional murders, like the murder of Jan or any other murders that are to come, or if there's some sort of, time jump and somebody turns up missing, or they decide to solve a cold case in the belt, or whatever the case may be, I would like them to bring in another murder for season 2 and to wrap this one up, or at least tell us who the killer is, even if they're, left uncaught, like by the police or whatever. I would like to know who the killer is by the end of season 1. I'm hopeful. We'll see though.
I think they will, because as much as I continue to theorize, we've talked about it before, this show is less about like the typical theorizing who did it and the suspense, and it is more capitalizing on the funny dynamics that these three have, the comedy, and the surprising amount of like character development you can get out of these interactions. And it's just telling a funny investigation story than your typical murder mystery.
Yeah, I would watch it for just the characters. I would watch it for just the mystery. I would watch it for just the acting. I would watch it for just the setting. There's a lot to love.
Basically, I would just watch Selena Gomez just stare at other people's ridiculousness and just utter amazement and be done with everybody else 99% of the time. All the time. I would watch that.
Have you watched her cooking show?
No.
Okay, it was on HBO Max. I think some of it is available online without having to like have the app or whatever. It was so engaging and pleasant and entertaining. This is high praise, but it for me captured that same sense of like happiness and calmness that the Great British Bake Off captures. Like it carried that same, you want this on in the background, you want to replay it, it makes you feel good, it cures your mental health. Like it was that kind of thing. So I really like the kind of content she's been putting out lately. I've never been I don't dislike her discography, but I've never like been to her concert or bought her albums or like whatever. But the content she's been putting out on the acting side of things, I've really been enjoying. Carrie in the chat. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, my history of being into Selena Gomez is much more on the acting side.
Yeah,
I was growing up during the time where she was on Wizards of Waverly Place, and she played a very similar character on that show as well. That had the kind of witty, snappy personality.
I was just going to read what Carrie said in the chat, even though it is in William's defense in reference to my Supergirl complaint. He says, if you're able to win an
Very.
ethical battle with the strongest force on Earth and the leader of one of the most significant publishing companies on Earth, I might smile a bit too. My problem was that he was in a battle with them in the first place. It's not about the fact that he won. I just didn't want him to be fighting them. I don't like the fact that he was fighting them. He says us reporters have to stick together. That's fair. Much credit to reporters. Lots of admiration your way. Nonetheless, William is on thin ice with me. Another DC CW show that I caught up on, which I will just mention very briefly as well with a complaint. We're sandwiching complaints. We're going to good stuff from here, is Supergirl. Don't get me wrong. I've actually really been enjoying it. And I strongly believe I'm in no position to offer complaints in regards to the show in general because I am not the target audience. This, I believe, is made for children and young adults, and I am 7,000 years old. However, related to that point, they had kind of a big episode this week where they brought in John Wesley Shipp, who you may know as the former Flash and also was on the Flash. They brought in a bunch of, kind of, I'll say big-ish names to show the former, Justice Society, JSA, kind of getting back together temporarily following a funeral. And because of that, in this episode, unlike almost any prior episode, we got a lot of scenes of adults, particularly older adults. So we're, what would be viewed as like parent age of these teens on the show. So those who are late 40s, early 50s, maybe, talking to each other. And you know how sometimes you're watching a show, like I think like The Walking Dead might be a good example of that, where you'll have teens that don't act like teens, or you'll have a scene where children are supposed to be talking to each other, or teens are supposed to be talking to each other, and it's like very obvious that the writers may be wonderful at writing adults, but they can't write kids. The opposite is going on Stargirl. When they have teens talking and interacting, it's moderately in the ballpark of how like teens and children and young adults talk and interact, like overblown and melodramatic because it's a superhero show, but like I believe that the writers have probably been in the presence of a 16-year-old before. I'm not convinced these writers have been in the presence of an adult before. They had the exact opposite going on. They had whole scenes where like a whole bunch of adults are talking to each other. And I'm like, what is this writing? This is not how adults talk to each other. Like, just, it almost seemed like you could have body swapped out the adults and replaced them with teens, but like teens from the 1940s or something, and they would have been exactly the same. It was like they would like use turns of phrase or words that showed they were trying to write for an adult, like terms that adults would use, but then like the way they interacted and responded to each other was like so much like a middle schooler who doesn't quite yet know like interpersonal like a really low emotional intelligence to a kind of unrealistic degree. Something about it didn't sit right with me. That show needs to think more carefully about how they write adults. And I wonder if that is one of the reasons why I've struggled with how they've been writing her mother. I really like her mother as a character, but I've had issues with like believability of her mother's romance with her stepdad. I don't see like chemistry or romance there. Her mom has consistently, there's been like mad chemistry with her and like all other villains, which I completely bring up all the time because it's the only thing close to a ship on this show. Like there's just been moments where, taken now into context with my newly found belief that the show can't write adults, it makes a lot of my prior issues with this show make sense. But I'm not the target audience, so I'll step off that soapbox and sandwich it back in with a positive. Here's one we both watched this week, although I finished it and you only watched the first episode, so I won't spoil anything. But Kate, what did you think of Squid Game so far?
I didn't like it.
Ooh, go on and tell us how much you
did not
watched too.
like
Just
it.
one episode, right?
I just watched one episode. I'm
Okay.
sure there's more to it. I struggled to get through the one episode.
Okay.
I watched mainly because I knew there was some scene with the doll that you've got on screen, and I at least wanted to get to that. And I just could not do it. If you tell me that everything after episode 1 is much different, then I might try it again. But it was painful to get through episode 1 for me. I could not do it.
Is it because it was like quite dark and violent and kind of unpleasant
I
outcomes?
No, because I've watched the boys, and the boys I would say it's actually more violent than this. Um, the, Part of it is I did not they did not engage me with the characters, and we've discussed this before. You have to sell me on the characters for me to care. I also thought that I understood the message they're trying to sell. It is kind of like a retelling of the same story we've been sold before, with the Hunger Games esque like battle to the death of money, and they're not killing each other, but they're trying to survive longer than the other person next to them. But there's something I just couldn't get into it. There's nothing particular that I can really like point to other than I didn't really care about the characters to get engaged.
For me, I think the strength of the show is in the writing and kind of the world building. It is difficult to attach to the characters for two reasons. And I will tell you, for me, I don't think that that gets better. There's two reasons where they're difficult to attach. Number one, the characters who enter this arena are supposed to be bad people in general. They all have some kind of baggage or flaw or whatever. But also, they kind of are. I want to say there's like, they keep trying to add like comedic elements to some of these characters in situations that aren't particularly funny. And I don't know if maybe it's like the language barrier or something like that. There just seems to be moments where these characters, I can tell they're supposed to be a bit of comic relief. And for me, it totally in my ignorance, I'm not getting the joke. So there's a scene that you haven't got to yet because I think it's in episode 2. This isn't a spoiler. It's just it's kind of like an extended comedic scene where two girls are basically in like a locker room type of bathroom situation. One of them is trying to explore like the ducts, the air vent type of area. So she climbs up in the ducts, and the other one's supposed to keep watch and like distract the guards. So it's this whole extended scene of like essentially bathroom humor where she's trying to like use noises to make it sound like this is why we're in the restroom for this long. We are, using the restroom and it's very difficult, and it's an extended poop joke. If this was a short scene, I would just completely ignore it. It's extended really long, and from the bottom of my heart, not one aspect of it to me was funny. Not one. Not one. So if it's a comedy aspect of attaching to the characters, if it's a like interpersonal aspect of attaching to the characters, I can't say that that gets better, but for once in my life, I actually care mildly about the plot, and that gets pretty good. The second reason why I think you might struggle to attach to the characters, and this is one that I struggled with, is the writing was so good, and I'm not sure the delivery really saved it or did it justice, I guess I should say. And I'm so used to shows where the writing is frequently terrible, but really good acting is really kind of holding this thing together. Suits is a good example of that. Frequently, you had Gina Torres, God herself, in scenes delivering lines that would be mediocre if delivered by anybody else, but she did such a great job that she made it powerful. We almost see the opposite here, where we see really powerful lines, but I'm not quite sure the delivery of everything lined up with the quality of the writing. I wish there was a nicer way to say that, but that is me praising the writing, not me putting down the delivery. It's kind of me putting down the delivery, but more so I just want to kind of praise the writing of this. This was also written before Hunger Games came out.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that it really wasn't like, I knew it was based on something and that it was an older piece of material, but I like it's a story, at least to the extent that I've seen, it's a story I've heard before.
Yeah.
And at least because even the Hunger Games, I was kind of like, I remember kind of going, okay, but you have to have more than just to the death. And at least they're like, I don't think the acting was a problem for me, but at least they had the acting there in Hunger Games. But for me, I think a lot of it actually comes down to more of, I can get behind like following characters that have flaws, like large flaws, villains, like heroes with one fatal flaw, things like that. It was more to me that this guy wasn't like a villain. He was just a guy that kept on, like, he makes mistakes. He is a flawed person. But it was kind of like a one-dimensional character. Even
Yes, actually,
like
yes.
I can appreciate that they were trying to go like, yeah, he's the father. He wants to provide for his daughter, but he has like a problem with gambling and he doesn't have money. He's lost his job and it's caused desperation. I get that, but it's a very generic picture rather than a three-dimensional person. And I understand that they probably did that for a reason. They probably wanted to show how like common this is and how like human this level of desperation is. But I'm always just more interested and sold on a story if there's a three-dimensional character at the helm of the story, and he just wasn't.
There
I would
is a
assume that
character
they
in
explore other
this who's kind of like she's sort of a lone wolf, but gets lumped into their team from time to time. And she was previously a model, but I guess she's dabbling in acting now, which is great and cool. But the character as written, great. The character has delivered one of the better deliveries on the season, in my opinion. So there are some characters that will come through that you may attach to, but it really took me some time to realize that the characters are all kind of melodramatic caricatures, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. I would not call them archetypes, but they are melodramatic caricatures. And as such, it's not that you are attaching to them as a person, but more so what they represent. The lead, particularly in the beginning, and he goes through some character development or a change in how they are representing his character, I guess I would say. The lead is not one that I attach to, and I'm not necessarily rooting for, in the sense that somebody might root for somebody to quote unquote win the games. But because the story gets more interesting, his place in the story gets more interesting. Carrie says in the chat, he says, oh, well, I think he might be talking about Stargirl, but he says it might be meant to.
Yeah, this is about Stargirl.
Yeah, that it's meant to be a bit hokey. I would kind of say the same thing about Squid Game though. Like there is an element of melodrama to it. There like when the type of jokes that they make, the type of caricature characters that they have, the over responses to things. So not over responses to the death as you've seen that happen throughout this. Like any response to that is appropriate and not melodramatic, but just kind of the I'm gonna say overacting that happens, the big facial expressions and stuff like that. I think there's kind of a type of humor woven into this that I I would just say I think is kind of going a little over my head, and I still enjoy the story regardless.
I think I might try to watch another episode, but if I can't get into it after episode 2, I probably will just not
That's
watch it.
fair.
But it's one of those things that was mildly interesting, and then it like got super popular. I was like, fine, I'll watch it. And I understand the general appeal, I really do, but it's just not connecting with me. And yeah, so I actually had to like, turn it on like double speed, or I was about to turn it on double speed just to get through it, just to know what happened.
You could just if the screenplay was available to read, I would almost recommend reading the screenplay rather than watching the show. That's how much I feel there's a disparity between the writing and the delivery. And that's not to say the delivery is not good. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that the story itself is a bit better than the production.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, oh, okay.
sorry, there's a delay. So I'll loudly be about to transition right as you're about to say a thought. Okay.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say I'll try.
And if you don't like it, don't watch it. You know, life's too short. What
Mm.
else did you watch this week, Kate? I know we've used up pretty much all our time, but what did you watch? What did you read? What brought you happiness this week?
So I read Jane Eyre this week. It was the first time I ever read Jane Eyre. Um, Feelings. I can appreciate what it was, and I think after I think about it longer, I might grow to like it more. But I think I got a little frustrated in the middle point, because gaslighting is not my favorite thing. But I read it and I persevered because there is a series of books that do like parodies of historical women named Jane. I've already read one of the other books, and so I read Jane Eyre to get the context of that story so I could read the book My Plain Jane. And this one is actually like a joke where she can see ghosts.
Ooh,
And
okay.
it's this whole like reinterpretation of Charlotte Bronte's in the story and is friends with her at the school. And now she sees ghosts and that whole thing. But the entirety of the story and just how it's written and the tone is just one ongoing joke. So it's very comedic. It's the entire time the authors are like looking at you and going, "Huh, you got it," which it's probably not for everybody, but it's such a funny contrast with the source material that I really liked it. I liked it with their version of it with Jane Grey, the Queen of England that was queen for 9 days. So it was kind of it's a fun read. I'm not done with it yet, but that's what I'm currently reading.
That sounds bomb. I have not read anything since The Love Hypothesis, since I'm not convinced anything can top it, but I will wait. I will eventually finish the 5 other books that I have in place. And other than what we already talked about, I've watched a bunch of reality TV that nobody cares about. But I will say there was a very romantic line this week in Bachelor in Paradise. One of the couples that got engaged, Riley and Marissa, they were so cute. And he said he was going through this thing of like when he pictures like having like a happy future, he pictures like he likes making breakfast in the morning, like on a weekend morning. And he says he pictures like waking up on a Sunday morning, making his kids breakfast, playing with his kids. His wife comes down and plays with them. Like there's breakfast made and they're just like all playing together. And he says to Marissa, the girl that he gets engaged to, that he proposes to, he's like, when I look at you, I see Sunday mornings. And I was like, that was very cute for a reality TV show. Good job.
I was gonna say, like, I was gonna go into this and be like cold hearted, like, yeah, okay, cute. That was cute. Dang it.
Right? And his delivery was spot on. I have no, delusions that
You're like,
anybody involved in this will like actually like stay together or has a heart at all, but excellent acting if nothing else.
yeah, you wanna pull him aside and just go, okay, what executive producer wrote that and
Right.
told you to say that?
Right.
Because they need to be hired on some of the other
Right.
like dramas that we bought.
Yeah. USA Network is hiring, I'm sure. Well, we
Sure.
are right at time, Kate. So I will not bore you with further Bachelorette news. Though I won't stop talking about it in the future.
Dang it.
I will see you same time, same place next week.